Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. This week, the state of Mississippi is flush with increased revenues and federal funds from the American Rescue Plan and the new infrastructure bill. But are state lawmakers prepared to quickly get money to where it's most needed in our state? Senator Walter Michel talks about his role with a new subcommittee, the process of negotiating with the House and the governor, and how to fill big gaps in hospital nurse staffing. Also, kids and COVID vaccinations. We're joined by Dr. Yvonne Maldonado, an expert in pediatrics and infectious diseases at Stanford University. And the big picture on immunizing children against infections in the U.S. That's all ahead this morning on Mississippi Insight. Mississippi's legislature finds itself in a tough spot, but not a bad one. On the one hand, state revenues are up, way up. Mississippi collected about $2.2 billion through the first 4 months of the new fiscal year. That's almost an 8% increase from the same period last year. And it's due in large part to federal stimulus funding linked to the COVID-19 pandemic. Lawmakers will budget roughly $6 billion from state tax collections alone. Add to that more than $4.4 billion from the infrastructure bill that finally passed the U.S. Congress. Over the next 5 years, it will provide $3.3 billion for road and bridge repairs and replacements, $429 million for improved water lines and pipes statewide, and $223 million for public transit services. There's $100 million for high-speed internet expansion, and millions of dollars more for airports, electric vehicle chargers, weatherization efforts, and even cyber security. And let's not forget, Mississippi is getting about $1.8 billion from the American Rescue Plan. That money may only been spent on certain expenses, including COVID-19 mitigation, easing economic hardship on businesses during the pandemic, premium pay for essential workers like nurses and police officers, and investing in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann has appointed a Senate subcommittee to lead discussions on how to spend the money. One of the 7 senators on that panel is Walter Michel. He's a Republican representing parts of Hinds and Madison counties. We spoke to him Wednesday at the state capitol about the tricky process of allocating all that funding and quickly to the programs and people who need it most. Lieutenant Governor Hosemann appointed you and 6 other senators to a special subcommittee designed to lead discussions on spending the American Rescue Plan. From your perspective, what are the priorities for the panel?
Well, it's a very well-defined set of priorities that we can spend the money on. It's infrastructure, but it's not roads and bridges like the new bill that was passed last weekend. It's mostly water, sewer, broadband, and there are some variations available for health care and also for some supplements to do with maybe some of the counties, municipalities on lost wages and some of the people who were unable to work during the period of time that the coronavirus was going.
When you talk about water and sewer, what areas are going to need? Like, Jackson's in bad need of water, but what other cities might
well,
have the same situation?
A good example would be a part of the area I represent in Ridgeland. Ridgeland just annexed an area to the west, and some of those people, believe it or not, are on septic tanks. So the city of Ridgeland will be able to run water lines to those houses and also sewer lines. That's the best example I could think of, and I've met with Mayor McGee, and we're talking about trying to couple some state money with the portion that they receive from the ARPA funds to try to bring water and sewer services to the west side of Ridgeland.
With all the money that's coming in, are we going to start seeing some real changes to what's going on with the state?
Could be if we do it right. That's what Lieutenant Governor Hosemann has said he wants to do. He wants to make sure that the improvements we make are not just for a couple of years, but a couple of generations, and we can do that through certainly the water and sewer projects, and then the extra money that was appropriated this weekend when we get our portion of that $4.4 billion on roads, bridges, and streets.
Dive more into the $1.8 billion and how you plan to spend that money. Break it down a little bit more for us.
It's $1.8 billion. Now, some of the municipalities and the counties have already received money. There was a bucket of money that went to the counties and the cities, and then there's $1.8 billion that went to the state. And the counties and the cities received 50% of their money May 1st, and then they're supposed to get the remaining amount in a year later. And our goal would be to try to work with the municipalities and the counties to find projects to where we can couple state money with the money they've already received from the ARPA funding.
And that money, and they have limitations on how that money can be spent.
Yeah, yes, it's on water, sewer, and broadband. And the interesting thing is, in both of these funding packages, broadband is mentioned. So the federal government is making it clear they want rural areas throughout the country to get broadband access. And that's the only thing really that's mentioned in both bills.
How long would it take us to get the broadband up and running in some of our rural areas?
Well, we've already, through the CARES Act funding, we did have a block of funds to go towards that. And the electric power associations in the rural areas are mainly the source of construction for those funds. And they would be better able to give you an example of that, of where the money has gone and what they've been able to accomplish.
How quickly can the ARP money be allocated to programs and communities that need it?
Well, the city and county funds are already available, and those boards of supervisors and city councils are already meeting to discuss how they want to spend that. And our goal with this subcommittee that's created by Lieutenant Governor Hoseman was to come up with the suggestions so that January 1st, the first week of the session, we can make recommendations to the Appropriations Committee as to how we want to spend the state's portion of the funding.
This is all one-time money, but Lieutenant Governor Hoseman and House Speaker Gunn have suggested that it should go to transformational and long-term projects, as you mentioned. But there are a lot of immediate needs, such as severe shortage of nurses at hospitals in Mississippi. How do you balance those immediate needs with some of the long-term needs that we have?
Well, that's definitely a source that we can spend the money on through the funding. I intend to get with the legal counsel at University Medical Center. They're preparing some summaries of where they stand on their budget. Another example, immediate need, is our state health insurance plan for our school employees and our state workers has bled through about $40 million in reserves. That could be a source of immediate funding needs for our state employees. The nurses, the healthcare workers, the hospital workers. It's possible we could set up some sort of annuity for that, because what we want to do is set up an environment where the nurses are going to stay in Mississippi and not get a quick source of funds and then go do a travel nursing program in New Orleans as an example. We want to keep them here.
And so how would you do that? Would you just raise the salaries for nurses so they won't opt to take a travel nurse position where they can make triple the salary?
It would be supplements through like for instance, University Medical Center. It'd be supplements for designed jobs.
Well, do you believe sitting in the House negotiators will be on the same page in deciding how that particular money should be spent? I mean, are you guys going to be agreeing on that, or is it going to be a challenge?
Certainly hope so. Of course, there could be a difference of opinion in the House of Representatives on how they want to spend the money, but our idea at the Senate is to go ahead and start meeting now so that the first week of the session we've got a general framework of where we want to spend the money, and we'll, of course, have to negotiate with members of the Appropriations Committee in the House as well.
You think the governor will agree with what you guys come up with?
You never can tell. I would hope so. There's going to be minor disagreements probably on where the money's spent, but it's a big block of money, $1.8 billion. As an example, we're getting $1.8 billion from ARPA funds, and the infrastructure funding that package that passed last weekend was about $4.5 billion. You add those two together, that's over $6 billion. Our annual budget is about $6 billion, so it's a whole other year's worth of funding that we'll be appropriating specifically for infrastructure.
We'll have more with Senator Walter Michel when Mississippi Insight continues. And how quickly do you think you guys will just get that money out into the areas and the communities that need it?
Well, the second infrastructure bill that was for roads and bridges, the ink isn't even dry on that bill yet, so we'll have to get a summary of where that money can be spent, and I don't know that we'll have time to deal with that this session, but certainly the $1.8 billion. The reason we want to start now is because Lieutenant Governor Hoseman has met with many mayors and many supervisors associations and told them, get your projects together, because we'd love to match state money with that. And that's when, like, I met with the city of Richland, and they already have a list of projects they'd like to spend their money on, and if we'll match the state funds, they're going to hire engineers and start immediately on construction of those projects.
And when it comes to these projects, are we looking at projects that will be seeing construction going on for the next 4 or 5 years, just continuous development going on?
In this instance, the city of Richland's example got about $6 million. So it won't take long to spend that on sewer and water needs. And as I mentioned, for the west side of Richland, the areas they just annexed, I would think that would be a quick project.
Mm-hmm. How is that money going to be spent, and where would you like to see some of that money go?
Or another roads program, maybe like we had in the early 80s, roads and bridge and interstate program and highway program. We've got a lot of city streets that are in awful shape. Just in the Metro Jackson area as an example, but we've got 82 counties we've got to spend money on. So we'll be relying on the members of the Senate that represent those areas that know where the local needs are for local streets. And then our Department of Transportation, of course, will help us on state aid roads and our state highways and our bridges.
And we know the majority of that money is going towards the bridges and stuff, but $430 million of that will go to water and sewer upgrades. You know, the city of Jackson says they need about $1 billion
Yes.
to repair their problems. How much do you think will go to the city of Jackson, and what can be done to help the city deal with their water issue so we don't have another water crisis that they had this year?
Well, the city of Jackson, amazingly, for decades, has been kicking the can down the road on water and sewer needs. I can remember back in the 80s, the mayor of Jackson talking about we need to address this problem. And Jackson is getting mighty lucky in that this big tranche of money is coming down from the federal government. They did receive a direct appropriation of ARPA funds, but they're going to need a lot more than that. And you know, we all want to help our capital city, but I've got 51 other senators who may have different ideas throughout the whole state of Mississippi where that money should be spent as well. So it's just a negotiating process. We want to help our capital city. You know, we have the Capitol Commission also. We have basically kind of like D.C. We have a police patrol in the state capital area, and we have a fund that's around $12 million a year now that goes into infrastructure needs around the state capitol and around Jackson State and close to Belhaven. So there's an annuity right there for streets and infrastructure needs, but that's a far cry from the amount of money that Jackson's claiming that they need to spend. And we'll certainly be talking with the mayor and the city council and seeing what we can do to reach that goal.
Is Jackson a priority when it comes to this, or is it?
Well, I represent part of Jackson, so it's certainly important to me. The city of Jackson is very important to me, but I've got to realize that someone who represents Tupelo or the Mississippi Gulf Coast or the northwest part of the state, it may not be as important to them. But we have to. Our state capital is located right here, and we have to take care of our home front.
There's a perception that largely lawmakers have turned their back on the city of Jackson. Do you believe that's the case, or do you believe that there's just other needs that are necessary elsewhere in the state?
Jackson has done very well here at the Capitol. The 1 cent tax for the convention center is an example. There's not many municipalities that have gotten that. That barely passed the floor of the legislature in the House and the Senate. They have an additional tax on restaurants that they've asked for tourism. The Capitol complex is, as I mentioned, about $12 million a year that goes specifically to Jackson. Jackson always wanted a tax in lieu of from the state for us to pay our share of using the buildings that are not on the tax rolls, our state buildings. There's a lot of churches that also aren't on tax rolls. And so we accomplished that through this mechanism of the Capitol Complex District, where we're diverting part of the state's sales tax directly to the city of Jackson. It's amounting to about $12 million a year right now. What we want to do is our subcommittee is first find out what the money can be spent on, so we're not spending a lot of time on discussing projects that are not allowed. Mm-hmm. And that would be something we'd want to know. If you can supplement losses during the coronavirus, but as far as a source of funds for future police officers to be hired, I'm doubtful that qualifies.
Mm-hmm. I got you. And so are you guys happy with that the funding's coming here and that you have the project that you'll be able to do in the future, or how are you feeling about the money that the state's getting above the nearly $6 billion that you guys will have to deal with?
It's going to be a lot of money. We have a very busy session. We haven't had our medical marijuana special session yet. We'll be dealing with that the first few weeks of the session. We've got to do congressional redistricting, legislative redistricting this year. There's a income tax swap plan that's been discussed. Each of us who are chairman of committees have important legislation in our committees we want to deal with, and you know, the extra funding, it'll be almost like we'll have a appropriations funding session within a session, because we'll be dealing with $6 billion of our normal appropriations for the state, and then we'll also be appropriating about a third of that also for ARPA funds. So during the CARES Act funding, it really became confusing sometimes as to whether we were spending the state's budget money or the CARES funding, because we were doing both in the same 90-day session.
Straight ahead on Mississippi Insight, we'll look at the COVID-19 vaccinations and how immunizing children may help bring the pandemic to an end. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Mississippi Insight. By the time you're watching this program, about 1 million American children ages 5 to 11 will have received their first doses of COVID-19 vaccination when the Food and Drug Administration authorized use of the Pfizer vaccine for this age group. It marked a new strategy for finally bringing the COVID outbreak under control. But in Mississippi, where less than 48% of adults are fully vaccinated, the effort to vaccinate children is bound to be slow going. We are joined now by Dr. Yvonne Maldonado. She is the chief of the Pediatric Infectious Diseases Department at the Stanford University School of Medicine. Doctor, welcome to Mississippi Insight.
Thank you so much.
Doctor, what do we know right now about the safety and effectiveness of the vaccine for kids ages 5 and 11 years old?
Well, first of all, we have given over 13 million doses of vaccine to children 12 and older, who are of whom about 12 million are now fully vaccinated. So they've gotten both doses. And we have seen that these vaccines are remarkably safe and they've been very effective. We know that in children 5 to 11, that for which the vaccine was recently just approved, there were about 4,000 children in the studies that were done to look at safety and effectiveness. And we know that the vaccines demonstrated a lot of high levels of safety with some redness and swelling at the site of the vaccine injection for about a day or so after the injection. And then low-grade fever, mild headache and fatigue in anywhere from 20 to 60% of the children that really only lasted about a day or so after they were vaccinated. There were no serious effects at all in that age group. And as you've seen already, almost 1 million children have now received the vaccine just in the last week since it was licensed under emergency use for that age group. So we know that this vaccine will can prevent up to 8,300 deaths, 8,300 hospitalizations and over 100 deaths in children in the 5 to 11 year age group. And we know that over 25,000 children under 18 have been hospitalized with almost 1,000 deaths. So this disease definitely strikes children for sure. Maybe not to the extent that it does adults, but it can strike young kids and all kids of all ages. And it is random. We just don't know who's going to get really sick and wind up in the hospital.
When we talk about vaccinating this age group in the broader picture of vaccinating for fighting COVID-19, how important is this to fighting that and also for keeping kids in school?
Absolutely. In addition to keeping our children out of the hospital and alive, the vaccines have another effect, and that is it's one more protective layer to keep our children from getting excluded from activities and social and developmental events. One of the really tragic things that happened with this pandemic is that it really isolated our children around the country because of fears of getting sick and fears of infecting vulnerable family members. And so what we saw was really pretty difficult situations where children didn't get to socialize. They didn't have the same developmental and learning opportunities. Now, bringing kids back to school now, of course, can happen and should be happening with masking and social distancing. But with the vaccine, you have an extra layer of protection. And in fully vaccinated communities, for example, in schools where everybody is vaccinated, it's possible that less masking and distancing might be possible in the near future.
What is your advice for parents, especially in Mississippi parents who may be hesitant to vaccinate themselves, let alone their kids?
Well, that's a great point, because we do know that the best predictor of whether a child gets vaccinated is whether their parents or caregivers are vaccinated. And we want to encourage adults to really carefully consider the benefits to their families of these vaccines. Over half of the world's population, 3.5 billion people, have now received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. We know that 70% of the US population has been vaccinated. These are the most studied vaccines in history. They have been remarkably safe and remarkably effective, especially in preventing hospitalizations and deaths. And so we want to make sure that adults go to their pediatricians and ask all of the questions they need to find out more about the vaccines and to feel comfortable with them.
What else should parents know about some common pediatric vaccines in general?
You know, that's a wonderful question. I really think that we have to make sure that our children are up to date on all their immunizations. We know that we are not caught up yet with measles vaccine and with other vaccines that prevent diseases like whooping cough and meningitis. And we want to make sure that because children may have skipped some of their doctor's visits because of the pandemic, that they get caught up with all of their vaccines. And we also include the flu vaccine because we know that about 60 to 100,000 people a year, every year, die from flu. And those are preventable deaths if people can get vaccinated.
A quick programming note. I'll be moderating as the runoff candidates in the Hinds County Sheriff's election will meet on 12 News for a live debate. Interim Sheriff Marshawn Chrysler and Sheriff's Captain Tyree Jones will face off at 6:30 Thursday evening, November 18th. It will be an hour-long program with the first half being broadcast on WJTV and the entire debate streamed at WJTV.com. We hope you'll join us. The runoff election is set for Tuesday, November 23rd. Big thanks to State Senator Walter Michel and Dr. Yvonne Maldonado for joining us this week. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown. From all of us here at 12 News, make it a great weekend.